Hey, how are you doing? Is everyone having some fun food? Good oat milk from Willa's? So my name is Chloe Sorvino. I head up food coverage at Forbes. I'm the author of Raw Deal, a book coming out later this year, all about hidden corruption, corporate greed, and the fight for the future of meat. And pretty much we're here right now because I'm not sure who in this audience has read the recent IPCC report and a lot of other really important content that's coming out, but we pretty much have 8 years to make massive change and save ourselves from massive climate destruction. And food has to feed us, but it also has to change how it's made to get us all there too. So we're going to be on this panel today, and then in a little bit too, talking more about all these different alternative proteins and different foods that technology is enabling us to feed us. So with that, thank you all for being here. Shelby, I'd love to start off with you.
It's because I love you.
Shelby here, who's representing the cricket protein world. We have Willa from an amazing oat milk company you can see over there. And we have Saloni, who's going to bring us in like the policy perspective. But Shelby, can you bring us into like, what is your business? How does it work? Who's growing your crickets? And why did you decide to go into the cricket world?
Heck yeah. First of all, hello everyone. I am Shelby Smith. I am the owner of Jim and Eat Crickets, and we produce sustainable alternative protein snacks from farm-raised crickets in the middle of the U.S. heartland. I am from Ames, Iowa, and our operations are mainly in Iowa. So I started this back in 2018. I grew up on a traditional corn and soybean farm. We farm about 2,000 acres of corn and soybeans. I had no interest in doing that, so I started raising crickets, obviously. So I have a contract grower network in the state of Iowa, so I have multiple growers around the state that grow for me. I taught them how to raise them. I provide the feed for them. They grow the crickets out. I take and process them into the final products. We have 3 different cricket products in our line. You can try a few of them outside at the bug booth if you guys want to come back later on today. So I have 7 flavors of roasted crickets. I have 6 flavors of cricket bars, and then I have 3 sizes of the cricket powder. We sell in stores all over the U.S. We sell online. I'm not on Amazon, but you can find me directly online in my store. And like I said, it's just, we've grown since 2018 and in the middle of America's heartland doing things a little bit different.
Amazing. And can you explain, just before we move on, like how it's processed, like and what you're actually doing to get it into that like food form?
Yes. So crickets, think of crickets like any other food ingredient. So initially, everybody's question is, how do you kill them? So they are killed in the freezer. So we harvest them, we separate them from everything, we kill them in the freezer, and then they are flash boiled, rinsed, and dehydrated. And then at that point, they can either be ground into the powder, which we can sell as is, or we can mix it into the bars and sell those, or we season them, roast them, and package them. And believe it or not, despite all of the research that everybody talks about of Americans are just not ready for the whole insect, 70% of my sales are actually my roasted crickets.
Wow.
So I would like to challenge that overall narrative of Americans are not ready for the whole bug. I think they are, as long as you are willing to have the conversations necessary to get crickets in mouths.
Amazing. Cool. Okay, Christina, can you explain to us a bit about how your business, Willa's Kitchen, has been growing and what you've been really doing to have climate and environment kind of at the forefront of the entire business?
Sounds good. Hi, everyone. Yeah, I'm Christina. You probably saw my co-founders, my husband Rusty and my sister Elena back there serving iced coffee with Cuvée, which is a local coffee brewer. We started Willa's originally because my grandmother had this amazing oat milk recipe that used real, honest ingredients, and we wanted to create an oat milk that we would feel good about drinking every day. And then as we dug into the category, we just kept learning more and more about the less obvious issues with the plant-based milk category. Of course, water use comes up a lot, soil health, in the use of Roundup. But the one that really shocked us was food waste. Food waste, a lot of people don't realize, is a leading cause of greenhouse gas emissions and climate change. It's, if it were a country, it would be 3rd after the US and China in greenhouse gas emissions. So it's a huge problem, and generally, when oat milk is made, 20 to 30% of the oat is discarded, and generally that's the healthiest part that has all the prebiotic fiber and protein. So we found a way to use the whole entire oat, which makes our oat milk really rich and creamy. It also means we've got all the prebiotic fiber and protein, good stuff that you associate with oats, and it's zero waste and a better choice for the planet. In terms of building a business that is putting, values and sustainability first, I mean, our business isn't just a name. It's named after my grandmother. It has to live up to her name. You know, equally, it's a business that's driven by values. So every single decision we make, every single action we take has to be aligned with our values. And I think because of that, it's kind of a no-brainer for us to always choose the more sustainable path. Sometimes that means making decisions about products and ingredients and partners that I think our competitors would laugh at. You know, if they saw what we spend on a cacao powder or vanilla extract, they might be a little bit shocked. But for us, it's just that's the right way to do things, and that's the only way for us to live up to the ethos of our brand.
I really appreciate what you both are talking about because, you know, scale and efficiency kind of has to happen in some ways for you guys to be able to grow, to get what we need to have more people be eating these foods. But at the same time, it's very hard to start these businesses and grow them and do them as you guys are really mainly bootstrapping, right? It's impressive. Saloni, can you bring us into like the regulatory framework? What are the challenges that entrepreneurs like this and scientists are facing as they're trying to build foods of the future?
Yeah, of course. And just wanted to say hello. I'm Saloni. I'm a food and agriculture analyst at the Breakthrough Institute. We are a technology-focused environmental think tank based in the Berkeley, California area. One of our focus areas is alternative proteins, and we develop innovation and industrial policy to help accelerate the sector. To get to your question, food is regulated by the U.S. Department of Agriculture and the Food and Drug Administration. It's fairly complicated, I think, to navigate because multiple agencies are involved. The U.S. Department of Agriculture regulates meat and poultry products and handles the organic certification program, which you might have some exposure to. And the FDA regulates all the other food products to ensure that they're accurately labeled and safe to eat. And so for smaller businesses and startups and entrepreneurs, it might be difficult to navigate that process if they have fewer resources than larger companies. And looking at cultivated meat specifically, it's a very complicated process because both agencies jointly regulate these products. So the FDA handles biomedical technology, and so they regulate the earlier phases of cultivated meat, like the cell proliferation process, and then regulatory oversight is transferred over to the USDA at the point at which animal tissues are collected. So unfortunately, companies and startups are operating in this environment where they're ready, very, very close to being ready to commercialize their products, but they're operating in a regulatory environment that is somewhat lagging. These two agencies are working really, really hard to resolve any remaining issues. So I think there's an opportunity for entrepreneurs and for the public sector, for many nonprofits in the space that are doing really great work to advocate for a regulatory framework that is both stringent enough to ensure that products are safe and to earn consumer trust and acceptance, but also clear and practical so that companies know exactly what milestones they need to hit in order to earn approval. I think that the Singapore Food Agency has a really great model. It's a streamlined and a forward-thinking approach to regulatory frameworks, and I think that's one that we could also look to for inspiration.
Shelby, could you explain a little bit about like how the cricket process has been going? Because it's not approved yet, right?
Right. So crickets right now are in a little bit of a gray area. They are not considered grass by the FDA. So based off of whether it will be USDA or FDA, to me, crickets are more closely related to shellfish and fish, which are under the FDA jurisdiction, versus USDA, which typically deals with larger livestock. In speaking with folks involved in FDA regulation in the past, they tend to think that it's going to be the same that way. That being said, the USDA did ask for comment on insect rearing and all of that stuff. So who knows at this point? We might be like cultivated meat and get to have both. So exciting. So it has been really interesting for me. Here in the US, our food regulation system is more of a beg for forgiveness than an ask for permission, whereas over in the EU, you must ask for permission before you do. So the way that I operate my facility, I went through and became a preventative controls qualified individual. I have a full Food Safety Modernization Act, which is FSMA compliant food safety plan for my processing facility. So many food companies, as they scale, will go to a co-manufacturer to actually produce the product. There is no cricket co-packer here in the US. So I had to become my own. So just navigating those waters has been really interesting and sometimes overwhelming as a small business, but I think the key for me, in a past life I was in banking, so I dealt with Central Bank of Ireland. I find that if you are willing to engage with the regulators, have conversations and back and forth, they're pretty easy to work with. They're not out here to get us. They want us to succeed. So I've really made it a point in my home state of Iowa to develop that rapport with my regulators and my inspectors.
I'm really glad you brought that up because I think like cricket co-packers, like what is that? But I think that's actually what I hear a lot about alternative proteins and different foods, food tech. There's a huge need for different like local manufacturing, local co-packing, like canneries even, like kind of more old school processing. And until we can get actually more of that type of business infrastructure out there with probably help from increased like regulatory framework, it's going to be very difficult for these businesses to grow. Can you explain like how your processing works a little bit too?
Yeah, so with Willa's, we wanted to make sure we use shelf-stable packaging. You know, if we want to be the most sustainable company, we don't want to be using refrigerated trucking and refrigerated storage. So the really cool thing about Tetra Pak packaging is it creates a vacuum seal and sucks out all the air, so you don't have to put any preservatives or anything like that in. It just keeps everything the same. What's really shocking to me is that for decades in the US, we invested in plastic bottle co-manufacturing and not Tetra Pak co-manufacturing. So there are only a handful of manufacturers in North America that do that kind of packaging. And in all honesty, the only reason the manufacturer that we're working with was willing to take a chance on us is because my sister has a background in manufacturing and chemical engineering. And I think they were literally like, well, she knows what she's talking about. She won't be annoying, so I guess we'll work with this little company. But it's super challenging. If you were to start a plant-based milk company right now, I don't know if you would be able to start just because you wouldn't be able to get time at a manufacturing facility, let alone work with one that you would really want to partner with.
That's so crazy. But no, I hear about those types of wait lists all the time.
To jump in on this manufacturing point and to add to what you just said, engaging with the public sector early on to troubleshoot these barriers is really important because there are many, I guess, tools in the federal government's toolkit to kind of help expand manufacturing and also multiply the impact of your investment. So there are loan guarantee programs that companies have used to kind of invest in expanding manufacturing. There's also advanced manufacturing institutes, so scientists in the federal government and scientists at alternative protein companies can kind of work together to troubleshoot these processes and learn how to make them work. So there are definitely opportunities to work together on this as well.
Okay, amazing that you brought that back to regulatory because I want to talk about subsidies and what government funding could look like in this area because I think that's honestly somewhat of a controversial opinion in a lot of cases. Like there's $38 billion in subsidies that are going to meat and dairy every year. So the government is funding a lot of food and impacting what we eat and what the costs are because of that. So in some ways, alternative proteins and different food tech-based companies are not in the same playing field, but also there's, I think, especially when you talk about lab-grown meat, there's like a little bit of a growing concern of, will the government just start funding lab-grown meat like Singapore and maybe Qatar have been doing? So can we talk about this on the group? What do you guys think? I mean, is there a space for public and private funding? How have you guys thought about your funding? And what role do you really think the government should have?
Yeah, absolutely. So at Breakthrough, we actually focus on innovation and industrial policy to help accelerate the alternative protein sector. And so there's a lot that the government can do to fund early stage research in this area. And there's a long history actually of the public and private sector working together and collaborating to advance innovation. To give you some examples, there's an organization called the Foundation for Food and Agriculture. It's a publicly funded research organization, and they organize public-private partnerships and research consortia, bringing together members of industry with public sector organizations like CGIAR, which is this international ag research organization, to advance initiatives that would make the food system more sustainable. You also have a history of companies taking advantage of early stage research that was funded by the government, which has inspired companies. We have some folks that are doing some research at Tufts in the back, I think, on cultivated meat, for example. In the plant-based protein industry, the Beyond Meat was inspired by some research that was funded by the USDA, which developed high moisture extrusion technology, which is the gold standard of plant protein production today. On the regulatory front, there's opportunities to provide public comment, like you just said. And there's also this new initiative that the U.S. government announced with the UAE government called Aim for C, which stands for the Agriculture Innovation Mission for Climate. And so companies also have another opportunity to provide funding and partner with public sector organizations and governments around the world to advance climate-friendly food production. So there are actually, I think, a lot of opportunities on the research and development and deployment side.
I think when it comes to, public policy, I'm not a public policy expert by any means, but when I look at oats, if we could incentivize more farmers to grow oats, so many problems could be solved. I mean, they're a major carbon sequester, so they pull carbon from the atmosphere into the ground where it belongs, which is, essentially fighting climate change. They're good for soil health. And right now, everybody's really focused on immunity. Well, prebiotic fiber is one of the best ways to improve your immune system, and obviously oats are a great source of prebiotic fiber. So if farmers could be more incentivized to grow oats, there would be a huge ricochet effect, and I think that's really powerful. I mean, knowing that the food system is creating 35% of the greenhouse gas emissions, that just creates so many powerful opportunities for us to be the ones to kind of help implement change and make a lasting impact.
Right. I feel like there's been a lot of studies that have come out recently. Even if every other industry were to change, if the food industry doesn't change, we are still not going to meet our climate goals. Like, this is so critical. Thank you for that. Shelby?
Well, I was going to say, as a Iowa farm girl, very entrenched in the corn and soybean and big ag, just nature of my surroundings. The one thing I will say about incentives for farmers going forward is a lot of consideration needs to be taken of what that program looks like when it sunsets, et cetera, because quite frankly, that is what has led to corn and soybeans being all that we grow. It was the government subsidies, the government incentives. It is now such a relationship with banks, the government subsidies, all of the above, that I 100% will defend majority of farmers, and that majority of farmers are not out here to ruin this planet, but they are stuck in a system that involves the bank and the government that they cannot. I look at our family farm, we would love to have a third crop just from the restorative nature with our soil. If we could rotate oats, if we could rotate hemp, if we could rotate any of these things that are going to help restore the soil in between those other major commodity crops, we'd be so much better off. So I almost cringe a little bit when people are like, I would love to do more subsidies. I'm like, we need to think about this a little better before we go do that, because it has created the system that we're in. So fool me once and all that.
Must be dismantled first before I think there's this redistribution that needs to happen.
Yes.
For sure. I actually want to stick with you, Shelby, for a second, because you were telling us earlier about something that I thought was very fascinating. You said that crickets are picky eaters, and that's impacted your business. Can you explain that?
Yes. So if you go back to 2018, when I was trying to decide what insect I was going to raise, it was between crickets and mealworms, because those are the two that are fairly common to the American palate. I like to call crickets the gateway bug. But at the time, I could not get over the wiggle of mealworms. I've since eaten them. They are delicious. In retrospect, mealworms are much easier to raise at scale because they are much less picky in what they eat. Crickets are, though people call them land shrimp, they are definitely not bottom feeders like shrimp. They're very picky in what they eat. We feed them a non-GMO insect blend, which just so happens to be sourced 7 miles from our original farm. Sometimes it's better to be lucky than good. That's one of the top 10 manufacturers of specialty feed in the US, and he's right at my doorstep, so it's awesome. But the other thing about crickets is it needs to be non-GMO or organic because of the amount of pesticide residue on conventional. Not a problem necessarily for you or I eating it, but for the insects, it impacts their immune system and really wreaks havoc on our entire population. So they are pretty picky. That being said, you also do need to have some source of complete animal protein in their feed, or they do start eating each other. So
Okay,
that's great.
That was the part for me. I was like, okay, we're talking about building these more sustainable, efficient systems, but they're still eating pork, right?
Well, and the reality of it is, so ours, it is you will see fish meal, you will see pork, and the reality of it is, yes, raising the crickets, you do still need to have meat in there. I would prefer my crickets don't eat each other, so you need to have something. But again, that's where in Iowa we are so uniquely positioned to do the bugs in a sustainable way because everything is right at our fingertips. We are the #1 producer of soy, corn, eggs, probably something else that I'm forgetting, and I always say bugs should be too. So all of that, my supply chain is very small in my network. So we're primed for it. I'm just trying to convince people. It's fine.
Okay, so that brings me to a question I want to pose to the whole group here. Crickets eating meat. Maybe, how much really do you think existing structures will be able to change or will have to change? It seems to me like there still are some overlaps between meat and some of these vegan alternatives. Do you think working in the system is the way forward, or do you think it's maybe a mix of both?
Well, I think I think we need to look at it as a larger picture rather than a binary of vegan good, meat bad. Like, there is a conversation about nutritional density. There is a conversation about here in the US, our obesity rates being so high. That is not sustainable long term, looking at the strain on our healthcare system and everything else. So again, I don't come from necessarily the binary of vegan good, meat bad. Obviously, I'm still technically in the meat industry, though I don't think they would have me. So I just think it's a larger conversation. I think there definitely has to be overlap. The other thing is, as we look at implementing and bringing back in like indigenous folks, black farmers, all of that stuff, who are we to tell them, hey, this has been in your culture, this meat has been in your culture for all of these years? Who are we to tell them, I'm sorry, you need to just be plant-based? I'm not here to do that.
Me
so
either.
I think it's just a larger conversation with lots of overlap.
I was going to say, equally on top of that, I think saying, oh, I'm creating a less bad alternative or a less harmful alternative, I just think we're past that point. It's time to start not trying to be neutral or just okay, but to be climate positive, to be net positive. And I think that's how we make decisions. How can we create more good, not just do less bad? And in the alt space, whether it's alt dairy or alt protein, I think there needs to be more of a conversation around that. Like, are we just creating something that is bad in a different way or not as bad, but not actively trying to find a way to make it really good?
Yeah, I agree with both of you. You have to manage both culture, the environment, public health, and also deal with the reality that meat consumption is growing around the world. And so we're going to need all of these solutions on the table. And what matters at the end of the day are the outcomes, right? What the environmental footprint ends up being, what are the health impacts end up being, nutrition impacts. And I think there's probably benefits to both. I mean, you can leverage existing structures as a business, existing food distribution channels, processing and manufacturing infrastructure to help scale up your startup and scale up innovation and bring your products to market faster. But at the same time, there are benefits to creating an entirely new supply chain because you can prioritize, let's say, workers and employees in that new system. Companies can organize themselves as employee-owned companies or firms, for example. They can probably provide better worker pay or worker protections, or set aside funding for charity and these other initiatives that I mentioned. And those structural adjustments are a little bit harder to achieve in the existing framework today.
Thank you for that. I really, really appreciate those comments. And I want to stick on those outcomes for a second. So health, nutrition, community, health, you talked about hospitals and just like the impact of what we eat leading to a massive health crisis. Can you all speak to how your organizations, how your work are particularly working at that intersection of nutrition and health and community, and what the challenges are that you're facing right now with that? Christina, feel free to start.
Yeah, I mean, so with every new product we come out with, every new recipe, we really try to make sure that if someone's going to drink this every day or feed it to their kids every day, or even some of our fans, give it to their infants who are dairy-free, that they can feel good about that decision. When we decided to make a chocolate milk, it sounds so simple, right? Everybody makes chocolate milk. There's so many kinds out there. But chocolate milk has really come to represent some of the worst aspects of our food system and, frankly, humanity. So, we were shocked to discover, for example, that cacao is actually associated with child slave labor globally. And so we really wanted to make sure we found a cacao company to work with that had, sustainability in mind, paid above fair trade wages, knew the farmers, had visited the farms. And so we partnered with Rocca Chocolate, which is just the most amazing chocolate company, but also has been a wonderful partner. And, they have this great relationship with these Peruvian farmers who've been making cacao forever. And then, when we decided, okay, we need to add a little bit of sweetness to balance that out, because cacao, of course, can be very bitter. We're like, okay, what's a sugar that, we could feel good about, that isn't, super high glycemic index, going to spike your blood sugar, or, not be okay for somebody who's pre-diabetic. So we ended up using maple sugar. And the R&D process took a long time to make sure it tasted really chocolatey and lower in sugar. And I guess my point with all of this is, if a small company with a really tiny R&D team like us can do that, I think there should be, accountability for larger companies to try harder to create healthier options.
Thank you.
And on the health front with crickets, I suppose I didn't tell you guys why crickets. You guys might be wondering that at this point. So crickets are actually 64% protein, so they're double the protein of beef. They have more iron than spinach, more calcium than milk. They're a good source of vitamin B12, omega-6s and omega-3s, prebiotic fiber. I could keep going. My whole thing with my products is that all of that is great, but if it tastes like crap, nobody's going to eat it. And then, so at that point, my whole goal is everybody's first cricket, I want it to be the tastiest cricket they've ever had so that they eat another one. So that's always been fundamentally my goal. I also tell people at the beginning, I only made flavors I liked because if nobody bought them, I was going to have to eat them. So you are always kind of at my mercy in that way. I've started doing like taste tester groups and things like that. So I've gotten a little more sophisticated as I've grown. But my whole goal is just to get your first cricket experience, whatever it may be. Maybe you can look at the whole thing. Maybe you need it ground up into a powder. Whatever it is, I just want that to be the most delicious and nutritious for you. So that's my goal.
Yeah, companies are dealing with so many challenges, right? You have to create products that are tasty but also affordable, right? A lot of these new products are a lot more expensive than the products that are their counterparts that are out there. They also need to consider the trade-offs with then taste, right? So when looking at, let's say, fermentation, precision fermentation, such as heme in the Impossible Burger or Perfect Days, casein and whey, these processes, they do add value to the products, right? They make them tasty. They might change the texture a little bit. Heme adds that like red blood feeling or look to the burgers to make them look realistic, but that can also have a high energy cost. It can also have trade-offs with health, and so I think that the public sector can kind of come in and increase research in this area around processing and developing these new high-value ingredients to end up making them cheaper and allow companies to scale and create products on the market that are cost competitive and help understand these trade-offs between taste and health for companies as well.
Awesome. Okay, so we don't have too much more time. I want to ask one last question here. Genie in the bottle question. For your work, a regulatory, business strategy, or otherwise, what would be one big wish you have moving forward?
I think it'd be great if it was easier to get an SBA loan.
Yep. I hear that.
I think funding for startups and food businesses are not cheap to start, and
Kudos to you for bootstrapping.
Trying to create more affordable options is super necessary in this world, and it is so much food insecurity. I think if there were just more financing options for small businesses, that would be huge, because really that's where the innovation is coming out. Like those are the businesses that are really pushing things forward on a nutrition level, on a sustainability level, pushing the new ideas and innovations and solutions we're talking about. So if there was more opportunities for people to take their ideas to market, that'd be amazing.
Yeah, and let alone too, just the racist institutions that have been not giving out loans to a lot of people
100%.
too. I mean, I would love to see better loan structures get to entrepreneurs so that you don't have to take out money from investors who just want to ruin your business.
On the policy front, I'd like to see the U.S. government and more governments have a long-term vision around alternative proteins and food innovation, and so that and create a pathway for more companies to kind of get involved, more scientists, and more groups to kind of get involved to make that vision happen. China has a 5-year plan, for example. They included cultivated meat as part of that plan. So I'd like to see a long-term plan and vision around that and how we're going to achieve what we need to achieve. There was a report that came out that said that for cultivated meat to make up 10% of the overall market by 2030, about $1 trillion would need to be invested to make that happen. So clearly a lot of funding is needed to help get these new products and innovations to market.
And the next panel will go into that a bunch. So excited for that tee up. Thank you.
So genie in the bottle, total genie in the bottle. I wish my crickets would stop eating each other. But outside of that, because I don't think we can fix that, I would love for there to be more localized manufacturing of all of these products that are much more easily accessible. And I think, at least in Iowa, that community kitchens and all of that stuff are finally starting to pop up. I know you guys have had them down in Austin. We're always a little behind the times. They're in the Midwest. We're working on it. So just making that more accessible for these new food products to be able to pop up. Have a place to be able to manufacture your product that you can then go sell to your local co-op or whoever will have it on the shelves. I think that's just a big barrier to entry for us little guys.
Well, we'll end it there, but thank you all so much. This is great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you to Food Tank. This is great. I've got to stay.